Well, again, thank you to everyone who is been listening in this afternoon, and those of you who are joining us now for the first time today. Just a few reminders. I think most of you by now are veterans of these events, but just remember we're at the mercy of tech. And so if something goes wrong, we will try to troubleshoot it, but just a little grace. Again, we encourage you to interact. We encourage you to ask questions. Just be respectful. And at the end, there'll be opportunities for networking, engaging, and interaction after our speaker. And Michael, I'm going to let you introduce yourself as well as pronounce your last name, because I'm afraid I may not do well at that. But before I do that, I just let people know that I'm going to be monitoring the chat for you, Michael. And so as you know, however you want to do it, do you want to take questions as you go along, or would you prefer we keep them to the end?
Probably doing a discussion at the end will work best for us today. Yeah.
Wonderful. So when you get done, just let me know, and I will help field the questions that come in for you. Okay.
Yeah, it'll probably be about 30 minutes worth of stuff from me before we get into some Q&A, which I'm looking forward to.
Wonderful. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to let you go ahead and share your screen. Okay.
I share my screen. All right, I'm going to do it. So hopefully everyone is seeing my screen now, right? So I'm Michael. Yeah, so I'm Michael Capretta. I'm the VP of Global Research and Insights and Analytics at Warner Brothers Discovery, which is what we now are as of just a couple weeks ago. So I've been with the company for nearly 22 years and have done a wide range of research work for the company during this time, and had stints on the news side and the corporate research side, and currently head up a group that does audience forecasting and modeling for what we call the TNets, which is TBS, TNT, and True TV. So, I want to thank, Billy and Bill for having me today. This is great. I'm glad that I, finally got a chance to do one of these. I've been really impressed with them so far. So I'm just going to jump into my my talk, and there's never been a more fascinating time to be involved in media research and the media business. The seismic changes we've seen in the past 30 years, and especially the past 10, have created possibilities and opportunities both for businesses themselves, but also for us as media professionals. And today I'm going to try and put some context around the changes we've seen and take a step back and allow us to visualize those opportunities and to remind ourselves why we're fortunate to be in the throes of this pivotal time, and think about how we can increase our strategic thinking and, to borrow a phrase, work smarter, not harder. So while we don't have time to get into the whole history of television, I'll start with a previous disruptor in media, cable TV of the 70s and 80s. To go from 3 channels to 50, 60, then 100 or more was truly groundbreaking. If you're of a certain age, you might remember the very day when the cable truck came through the neighborhood, hooking up everyone's cable. Or you might remember the day when you found a channel that played music videos and only music videos, and it blew your mind. And wait, all they do is show videos all day long? It was great. And for the tweens of the day with too much time on their hands, there was nothing better. But as a business, it was truly groundbreaking too. Cable tycoons of the day were making big moves and laying the groundwork for the business for decades to come. One key component of the cable TV business model they stumbled onto had huge implications, even if they didn't necessarily know it at the time. They smartly invented 2 revenue streams as the foundation of the business. There was the ad-supported business model, just the same as broadcasters had been doing. You air programming people want to watch, and you sell advertising during the show. Easy peasy. Secondly, subscriber revenue from cable operators. They were so motivated to grow their subscriber base that they were willing to pay for the content, something that they weren't doing with broadcasters at the time. I suppose you could have called it ITC, right? Indirect to consumer. So that's interesting. Think about that. So the key to the business was a recurring subscription revenue model, and it wasn't dependent on viewership or even usage. And that sounds kind of familiar. Today, lots of companies are banking on a recurring subscription model to be successful. Fitness gyms have always done it. Maybe there was a wine of the month, but at least then you were, getting something tangible in return. But now customers are being asked to sign up for a recurring subscription for everything from guitar lessons to online greeting cards to videos of people riding stationary bikes, because paying $2,000 for the stationary bike wasn't enough. For cable, business was great. Audiences were going up year after year, and subscribers were climbing every year, and two streams of revenue were coming in. And there were a lot of things about it that were easy, even if it was overlooked at the time. First, we understood how an audience behaved. They woke up and turned on the TV or radio. They got in a car, they listened to the radio. Kids come home from school, turn on the TV. Families watch TV together at night. So it was like the American dream. Okay, sometimes maybe on the weekend, they would swing by Blockbuster and pick up a couple movies, one action movie, one rom-com, one kids movie, and everyone's covered, right? But we also knew how to count all of this viewing. The industry all agreed on the metrics, and Nielsen supplied it. Average audience, rating, share, reach, it was all transparent, and everyone had access to competitors' performance too. As long as we protected the two streams of revenue, all was good. And since the business model was clear, the metrics that got us there were clear. There was no differentiation between companies in terms of metrics. What differentiated media companies was content. And media companies could devote resources and energy developing or acquiring the best content. So what took up our headspace at the time was what was going to be the next big TV hit. So who knew that Who Wants to Be a Millionaire was going to be a national sensation, which for a fleeting moment it was. Who knew that Survivor would break open the floodgates on unscripted TV that we're still drowning in 22 years later. And the playing field was even enough in competing on content that the old guard broadcasters felt threatened. Cable TV was disparaged as not serious and lowbrow content, cheap production, and not worthy of people's time. And that's a common defense whenever your new way of doing things disrupts the status quo, right? And we've heard the same thing today about new content streams that have sprung up. Cable TV cared about how they built a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week schedule. They curated the programming for their audience, and they built brands. Cable TV worked hard to be broadcast replacement. Cable networks couldn't believe advertisers would not pay the same price for what was sometimes the same programming on cable versus broadcast. When old media companies were running down the cable nets, that sort of worked. The gap between what advertisers pay for broadcast versus what they'll pay for cable still exists today. But legacy can be a hard thing to let go of. Okay, so there's something important, and that sounds pretty familiar to today's media business too. So we'll come back to that, but legacy can be a hard thing to let go of. But soon, hit TV shows could come from anywhere. The Sopranos, Iron Chef, The Closer, The Shield, were all buzzworthy shows that generated as much conversation as broadcast shows. And as the internet came to age in the late 90s, early 2000s, it was clear it would fundamentally change the business that was coasting along. We thought We thought pets.com or stamps.com were going to make us rich. And if you were smart enough to buy Amazon.com because you thought it was going to make you rich, I guess in that case you were right. But most didn't, and the internet bubble burst. And then not much changed initially. We sort of went back to status quo. Some internet companies got their hands on traditional media, like AOL capturing Time Warner, and other media companies made sure to solidify their space in the online world with a lot of success, as ESPN did with sports and CNN did with news. But largely things remain unchanged while that specter of this newly connected world was bubbling under the surface. I remember a former boss telling us we couldn't be TV researchers anymore, that we had to be media researchers. We were given reading material like Who Moved My Cheese and The Fish Philosophy, all dealing with adapting to change. And it was great advice. It put us in a mindset of welcoming change. It was working in media that have developed adaptability have thrived. It was and is a valuable skill to develop. It remains more valuable than ever. Today, you might hear it called change management. There's a whole niche industry built around it. And eventually the disruption came. The content we were all fighting over started to get more expensive. Cable was now producing a mountain of original content. Acquiring content from studios and broadcast nets was competitive among those that needed more content to reach more eyeballs. And when it got expensive, the costs were passed on to customers via cable operators who were paying more in subscriber fees to keep quality content flowing from the cable nets. So there's a big chain reaction there. Around 2014 or so, there started to be some cracks. For the first time, subscribers began to decline. Not necessarily in the households, those still looked pretty strong, but in the younger demos, the decline was beginning to reveal itself. Those that wanted to paint a rosy picture could still do so. They could say, well, those are just young people that don't know any better, and when they grow up, they're going to get a cable subscription. It's still the best deal around. But it was an early warning sign, especially considering that media viewing is behavioral. Once it evolves, it's unlikely to reverse itself. And that's an important thing to remember. And eventually, customers started to push back on cable bills reaching $200 a month. Viewers started to cut the cord. Slowly at first, but for a struggling young adult living on their own for the first time, it was no longer a no-brainer that you needed a cable subscription. For those too young to remember this ancient era, it went something like this. You make a call to a cable operator, sit on hold for 45 minutes, set an appointment for a 6-hour window that the cable guy would show up. And they would always show up a half hour after the window closed or as soon as you ran a 5-minute errand. But eventually the cable guy would arrive with huge 9-pound cable box for each TV that you had. Hook everything up just in time to host a Melrose Place viewing party. Then you get the first monthly bill, and the $95 a month cable package you thought you were buying was really $180 a month once fees, equipment, taxes, and something called a regulatory recovery fee were included. It wasn't exactly customer friendly, and customers started to push back. The number of ways to consume content was multiplying. Viewing was fragmented in ways we'd never seen before. Even if viewers weren't quite watching full-length feature film on their phones, we could easily picture a time when they would be able to, or to watch a live sporting event wherever they were. In 2007, Netflix announced that subscribers could directly stream movies to their homes, and streaming was born. At the time, it was thought consumers weren't ready for this. Even our home internet connections may not have been ready for it. But what Netflix knew was that it was better to be too early than too late. I remember the reactions inside media at the time, and it was fairly dismissive, saying things like, they can't do what we do. Well, they don't want to do what cable networks were doing. They were playing a different game. Media execs weren't exactly shaking in their shoes. one even famously comparing Netflix to the hapless Albanian army. Part of the Netflix strategy was to have a deep catalog of content, and they came with a big checkbook. And cable TV was starting to see some of those cracks in the armor, and they could use the cash. And if Netflix wanted to overpay for content, the studios and networks were happy to let them. And this had implications on audience measurement as well. When the C-suite asked how many viewers watched a show, the answer was no longer so easy. We were counting digital viewers. Were we counting the digital viewers, the mobile viewers, pirated viewing? Were we counting laptop and desktop, BlackBerry and flip phone, Etch-a-Sketch? Did we count viewing in bars, restaurants, hotels, airports, that TV above the gas pump at the gas station? So it was getting ridiculous, right? It was everywhere. The viewing was fragmented, but it wasn't always fully monetized. That wasn't something media companies were accustomed to, not monetizing every eyeball. So when you could count all the viewers across all of these platforms, it wasn't apples to apples because not all of it was monetized. The viewing that wasn't fully monetized became known as leakage. So now leakage wasn't just something middle-aged men were dealing with, but middle-aged media companies as well. And what was the best way to capture all this leakage? Depends. All right, so it's one thing to put a depends like joke in there, but it's not like, there's a whole slot. I was like committed to this joke, so let's move on. All right, media researchers did the best they could and started blending metrics together. And the best name for it was Frankenmetrics to describe what we concocted. They made sense to those that created them, but explaining it to the C-suite was a little harder. These Frankenmetrics were no longer common and transparent across companies. Each company had their own little black boxes that contained our secret metric sauce. And if we were media researchers and no longer TV researchers, what did that mean and how did you become one? It meant learning new metrics and parsing the non-traditional TV viewing. How do we measure who was watching bootleg Adult Swim shows on YouTube? Is YouTube going to give us a rating for that? And can Nielsen measure it for us? So nope and no. As with many industries, data analysts and data scientists became increasingly necessary to sort through the unregulated metrics that were being concocted, sometimes on the fly. And the truth was, there were many TV researchers that didn't have the skill set to pull off this transition. It is not easy. And I've seen media research struggle with the most basic statistical analysis. I've been there myself. But there were also a lot of data scientists that couldn't grasp the nuances of what influenced viewing. And it raised a question for us. Is it easier to turn a media researcher into a data scientist or turn a data scientist into a media researcher? Well, data scientists were expensive. You might have an opening for a research director, let's say, but you soon find out that hiring a data scientist or a data director or even a data manager might be 20% or 50% more expensive than a media research director. And they wouldn't even be equipped to do most of the job functions the person they were replacing was doing. So status quo wins, and you end up with another media researcher. So efforts were made to turn media researchers into data scientists, and that got mixed results at best. The truth is, it is usually only successful when the researcher already has a knack for data and, more importantly, is self-motivated to do it. So this media researcher, you want to shape-shift into a data scientist. They have to be self-motivated because after trimming down all areas of the organization, no one could afford to continue doing the job they were currently doing, or really the 2.5 jobs they've now been saddled with since trimming down staffs. That meant they were doing it on their own time, or even better, they were finding ways to automate their traditional job, which freed up time to explore the skills for the new world they were entering. part of the secret was to not tell too many people they partially automated their job. That report that took 4 hours every week to produce, don't tell your boss it now only takes you 15 minutes. So next, companies started to build out data decision science teams to navigate the flood of data to support the non-traditional TV viewing data. The instinct of the company was to have the data team report up to a tech division, which would then support the media research that reported up to a different division. Again, mixed results. The data team is flooded with a wide range of requests. The requests on the sales side or the ones directly impacting revenue were always going to correctly be prioritized first. They usually didn't have time for programming or marketing requests that fell to the bottom of the list. And the media researchers understand the context of the data they're providing, and it usually isn't black and white. Is the data for finance, or is this for marketing? Is it for content developers? Is it addressing an ROI question? Is it a PR claim? So there isn't, an outcome for the data that works for every group. The institutional knowledge of how the data would be used in a media company was important, and sometimes overlooked as we became enamored with all of the new data streams that were available. Nuances of how the data was being used mattered. And I've seen data scientists with PhDs, some of the smartest people you'll ever come across, get laughed out of a room of media researchers by misinterpreting viewing data. It was a stark revelation of the disconnect that existed. So all of this is to say, and here's kind of my hot take and where we'll bring this together, not just for media, but for a lot of fields that are pulling together data and insights, is that if you are in an organization that is still structured with an insights division that does not have data scientists embedded in it, you're probably still struggling with marrying these two disciplines. Media researchers are going to most benefit from the data science support when working under one unit, reporting up to the same division with the same goals and accountability. Data science will be best used when embedded within this organization. But this is challenging, it's hard. The way that people move up in an organization is to be good at their current job and get promoted to supervise the people now doing the job they used to do. In a truly embedded organization, a data scientist might be led by someone that is not really a data person or didn't have come up in the industry as a data person. They may not know SQL from Python. And that can be difficult for people on both sides of that dynamic. This increase in the rate of change for the industry is going to continue, right? Media consumption is behavioral, as I mentioned before. Changes that occur for viewers, even if they're accelerated by something like a pandemic, are likely to be permanent in nature. You get the feeling that we're always on the cusp of another seismic change, whether it's crypto or NFTs or Web3. A colleague of mine told me I was obligated to get those words into the presentation somewhere, right? Every research presentation has to have them in there now. But the need for a marriage of data science and media research will be more important than ever. So everyone has to continue to embrace change, and that's no big revelation. And everyone's on board with that. But in conclusion, the hardest part isn't taking on the new ways of thinking, it's letting the old ways die. So thanks everyone for letting me talk with you guys today. I'm happy to have a discussion or take some questions, and Billy's going to moderate. She didn't like my joke that was in the middle of the presentation. I saw her cringe.
I loved it. In fact,
okay.
Yeah, in fact, Michael, thank you so much. This was a very refreshing presentation. It showed your skills as a storyteller, that everything was visual. And I think nowadays when we see so many slides that are just full of words and charts and so forth, especially in the research world, it is so refreshing to see this type of visualization. And you talked about that at the beginning. visualizing opportunities. So thank you so much for presenting this to us. At this time, if anyone has any questions for Michael and I will just start talking. If anybody wants to jump in with anything, that would be great. I guess I will kick off the first while we're letting people kind of digest what they just heard. You talked about at the beginning seismic changes, and obviously in the media space, you've kind of profiled what some of those look like. We've all seen it, especially as we've moved to streaming content, and that's obviously really changed your world, right? So when you are in research and you're helping people internally, especially in the C-suite, visualize opportunities, how do you approach that? Especially when a lot of this is very data-driven information.
I don't know that that's the hard part, honestly. I mean, I think that the leadership really is pushing in these directions, and they're very aware of what the future holds, and are, very good at, very forward thinking about and understand where things are going. When we're asked to figure out how to get there, that's the challenging part, right? And getting there can be the challenging part, especially when, I work in a company that is, a mature and very large company, and it's that's when it can be hardest to change directions. And sometimes there's an analogy of, we're painting an airplane while it's flying, right? We're really trying to change the company and reprioritize how we're, how to meet viewers where they are, and not just try and force them into an old way of viewing content that they're not on board with anymore, right? We have to be able to, as I said, embrace the change that's happening.
Mm-hmm. Are you seeing quicker shifts across generations? So, like, for instance, our generation versus the millennials versus the next generation that's coming up behind them. Are things changing at how fast are things changing compared to maybe, 50, 70 years ago, even 20 years ago?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's incredible how much, quickly things are changing right now. And, in just the past 2 or 3 years, things are, the landscape of viewing looks very different. That, just to think that, 2 or 3 years ago that, Disney Plus didn't exist and HBO Max didn't exist, right? And now those are among the major players in the streaming wars immediately. So, changes like that have, huge impact. And the impacts in terms of cord cutting and older viewers adapting, to change in this changing way to view content, the way that, younger viewers take it on so easily. But, we're seeing it now in some of the older demographics of, 50 plus, is also, viewing things very differently than they did just a few years ago.
Well, and to that point, then you also talked about, and you said that this was really important, and I wrote this down because I love it. Legacy can be a hard thing to let go of, but it's the only way to go forward, right? So can you give us some examples or talk to things within your own organization that you have found, even though they sound very open-minded and they know they have to be progressive, where you've encountered something like that and how you've dealt with it?
Yeah, I mean, look, I still focus, most of my current position is based on linear TV networks right now, right? And that's we all understand that's the part of the business that's not growing, it is shrinking, but it still generates a lot of revenue, billions of dollars for this company. So it remains very important to keep that business as healthy as we can so that it can fund the new areas of the company and the new priorities that the company has to move forward. So, I think we are all on board with the changes that are happening. Of course, when there's revenue involved, it can be difficult, and it's a hard decision to make when it's time to let go of revenue, to be able to put resources into where we think viewers are going to be in the future. So at some point, you do have to let go of at least some revenue to continue to fund that. if you're just going to try and continue to maximize linear TV networks and linear TV viewing, it'll be a tough task.
Okay. I just realized I had the chat button open, but the Q&A, there are questions coming in. So I apologize, Megan. I'm going to go ahead and ask your question. With large organizations oftentimes being in matrix of functions where insights and data science are separated by the functional organizational design, how do you think these two can come together in spite of organizational design?
That's a good question. So in a matrixed organization, yeah, that can be really tough. I can only, speak from the experience that I've had, and most of my career has been working for a centralized research function, which for our company and in my experience worked really well. That we were reporting up to a central research chief that could make sure that we had a lot of quality control, that we were having savings across organization in terms of the vendors we were working with, in terms of making sure that the researchers across whose work was concentrated across different divisions were learning from each other along the way. Those were all some huge benefits to having that centralized organization for us. If in a matrix organization, which I only kind of have had a little bit of experience with, it took a lot of communication, ends up being really challenging when things are moving fast. It can be done, I'm sure, and I'm sure there's a lot of places where it works well, but I don't have as much experience directly with it.
Do you know of, or have you seen a company that you felt was more effective in this area?
I think that there's some of the sales agencies tend to be organized this way, and it seems to work for them. And it works in that kind of area of the business, on the buy side of the media business. So that seems to be where it works best.
We have another question coming in. And first off, he wants to tell you, great presentation. It brought back a lot of great childhood memories for him. And then he wanted to ask the question, do you find having the data science as function internally versus as an external partner better, or can you develop strong external support as well?
Sure. I mean, I think you can. It would take a real close relationship, but I do like when it's internal, as I said, I think when it's laddering up and having the same priorities is a key component to this, right? That it keeps accountability in line under one hierarchy, and that can be harder when it comes from an external group. But absolutely, yeah, you can have strong external support, and I certainly do right now from a lot of divisions in this company with relationships I've built over the years, and it's worked really well. But less than a year ago, when I was able to bring some data science knowledge directly into the group that I oversee, that to me was when we were able to make really big steps forward, right? And that was kind of the inspiration for my presentation in the first place, that I saw the change that it had for me and my team when we were able to bring it in-house. And as I mentioned in the presentation, it was the first time that I hired somebody to do a job that I couldn't do myself, and that can be kind of scary for me. It's probably scary for the person that I hired to do that job also, that they don't know how to do my job. And so that was that disconnect I talked about a little bit, but but the benefits have been humongous so far and really set us up for a lot of success. There's a lot of still external data support that we need, but even bringing just some of that function directly into our group makes a huge difference.
And Michael, for those of us who don't have interaction or a data scientist in our companies or access to, can you kind of explain like the role that they play, kind of how they change things for you, the approaches that they take and kind of that role that they serve?
Yeah, I mean, it allowed, in some ways it was just a prioritization. I couldn't ever, prioritize spending that much time wrangling all these different data sources together to, that we wanted to bring into one report, for example. It was just hard to prioritize that. When we bring someone in and we make that their primary job function, well, they're held accountable for it now, and they're, spending their time doing it. And it was, us as a department saying that that was a priority and carving out a position to do that. So for me, that was the biggest difference. And it meant, squeezing some other members of the group too, when that weren't part of that kind of data science function. Some of their, at least certainly initially, some of their job felt a little busier and a little tighter because there weren't as many headcount resources being put to the work that they were in charge of. But only if, a few months later, I think we're on the other side of that and already making the job easier for our team of media researchers based on the flow of data that we've been able to set up with our data science manager in the group.
If anyone else has any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box. In doing that, so the prioritization and having someone be able to really be focused on that, I'm curious as to how that changed your role in your ability to spend more time in the interpretation and the activation of the information.
Yeah, absolutely. It's and that's the goal, right? Is to give us more time on analysis and insights and less time on crunching numbers or wrangling data. And it's allowed us to turn things around to some of our clients whose jobs are to do those same things. We have clients that we're accountable for on the ad sales side, or even in the in a finance function, or even in the scheduling side of the business. That we're able to provide them with data much easier than we had been before. And so it not only benefits our group that we can spend more time on the analysis and insights and pass that on to our clients in terms of, hey, this is what we're seeing in the data, and here's the data that we've been able to pull together and pass on to them in a simplified and kind of pared down way, so that it's not dumping data on them, that we are curating and filtering that data to what is important. That's, I see that as part of our job. So yeah, it has definitely allowed us to spend more time on the insights and analysis than the data crunching. Absolutely.
And thank you for that. And unless anyone else has a question, I have one more, and it's kind of a fun one, I think. I'm just really curious what you're seeing in regards to trends regarding content.
Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. It's hard to say. It's I know what I like on TV, and I watch a lot of sports, and I watch a lot of live sports, and that's going to continue to be something that holds together a TV bundle, right? And there'll be big changes on the sports side, coming up in the next few years for sure. But I also watch a lot of content that is a little more futuristic, or that kind of speaks back to the times we're in. I'm watching Severance on HBO. Sorry, it's on Apple Plus. It's not even an HBO Max show. It's on Apple Plus. I love the most recent season of Search Party that was on HBO Max. For fans of that show, it was one of my favorites. So those things that kind of speak to the times that we're in are things that I like. But there's something for everyone, right? There's such a mountain of content right now that there's something for everyone out there, right? And a lot of people are finding that they like to escape into the silliness of, some unscripted television, and, that is very prevalent right now, right? And can be really well done at times.
Michael, thank you so much. I think others are commenting in the chat saying that they really enjoyed this presentation as well. Like I said, it was very refreshing, and I love the storytelling aspect of it. And thank you so much. It's a very interesting space that you're in.
Great. Well, I'm glad everybody enjoyed it. Yes, I didn't want to flood people with more data and numbers and charts, and thought it might be a good, something a little different from what they sometimes see.